The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center hadn't seen this many people since the building opened. The fire marshal hovered nervously by the door as residents packed the room, spilling into the hallway. Local news cameras had set up in the back, their bright lights creating an interrogation room atmosphere. Thomas arrived early, setting up his presentation with Rob Jenkins's help. The room hummed with anticipation as Victoria and the remaining board members filed in, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who could only be their hastily retained attorney. "We'll make this brief," Victoria announced, trying to seize control. "There's been a misunderstanding regarding some utility work." "Point of order," called Mrs. Patel, rising from her front row seat. According to HOA Bylaw 7.3, emergency meetings called with resident petition signatures, which we have, are to be moderated by the resident who called the meeting. That would be Mr. Morgan. The retired judge smiled thinly. "I believe the chair recognizes Thomas." The next 2 hours unfolded like a courtroom drama. Thomas presented evidence with the precision of a prosecutor, each new revelation drawing gasps from the audience. He projected emails onto the large screen, played audio recordings of conversations, and distributed documentation packets with highlighted sections. In total, Thomas concluded, "We have identified $237,500 in misappropriated funds, 17 instances of falsified documents, and 32 violations of county ordinances." Victoria's attorney attempted damage control. "My client was acting to secure technological advantages for this community ahead of competing neighborhoods, enhancing your property values, while collecting a $50,000 personal consulting fee," shouted someone from the back. The meeting descended into controlled chaos as residents came forward with their own stories. Arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, denied improvement requests that mysteriously were approved after donations to Victoria's favorite charities. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Victoria and 4 board members were removed immediately. The crowd erupted in applause when Rob Jenkins was nominated as interim president, with Mrs. Patel as treasurer to audit the books properly. As the meeting adjourned, a Velocity Fiber executive who had been watching from the back approached Thomas. "That was enlightening," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Chen, VP of Community Relations. It appears our company was misled about several aspects of this installation. We'd like to make things right." 3 months later, Thomas stood in his front yard admiring the newly restored landscaping. The rare Japanese roses had been replaced, at Velocity's expense, with specimens even more impressive than the originals. The fiber line had been properly rerouted along utility easements, with fair compensation paid to all affected homeowners. Thomas didn't sleep that night. The USB drive's contents had revealed corruption far beyond what he'd imagined. Kickbacks, forged documents, falsified permits, and a paper trail of Victoria's 5-year campaign of petty tyranny over the neighborhood. By 3 a.m., he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by printouts, 3 empty coffee cups, and a legal pad filled with options. File county complaint, 6 to 8 month investigation. Sue HOA and Velocity, $50,000 plus in legal fees. Report to FBI, unlikely to prioritize. Gather support from neighbors. Too slow, Victoria could destroy evidence. As dawn broke, Thomas stared at the last empty line on his list. A memory surfaced from his childhood. His father, a telephone lineman for 30 years, teaching him about infrastructure. "Cut the line. Stop the service," his father had always said. Nothing gets people's attention faster than disconnecting what they take for granted. The idea crystallized suddenly. Thomas spent the morning meticulously researching property law. By afternoon, he confirmed his suspicion. Unauthorized utility installations on private property could legally be removed by the property owner. He printed the relevant statutes and highlighted them. He called in sick to work the next day, Wednesday, when he knew the HOA office would be closed and Victoria would be at her weekly spa appointment. Mrs. Patel had agreed to text him if she spotted any Velocity trucks in the neighborhood. At precisely 10:13 a.m., Thomas stepped into his yard wearing work boots, jeans, and the high-visibility vest that made him look surprisingly official. He carried a toolbox containing cable cutters, electrical tape, and a small digital camera. With methodical precision, he documented the entire process, first photographing the undisturbed soil, then carefully excavating 6 inches of the trench to expose the black fiber cable. He photographed the cable in situ, making sure to capture how it crossed his property line. Thomas slid on insulated gloves, positioned the cable cutters, and paused. This was the point of no return. 15 years of Victoria's reign flashed through his mind. The elderly couple forced to remove their wheelchair wrap because it was unsightly. The single mother fined for having a basketball hoop, his own roses, now destroyed. Thomas arrived at the HOA office at 8:59 a.m., 1 minute before opening, dressed not in his usual business casual, but in a full suit and tie. The receptionist's eyes widened as he strode in, carrying a leather briefcase stuffed with evidence. "Good morning," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I need to speak with Victoria. It's urgent." While waiting, Thomas methodically arranged his ammunition. High-resolution photos of the damage, printouts of county regulations highlighted in neon yellow, copies of the HOA bylaws with relevant sections tabbed, and his coup de grace, drone footage he'd captured at dawn, showing the entire neighborhood with the unauthorized cable path clearly visible. Victoria Hargrove breezed in 15 minutes late, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor. Her smile faltered when she saw Thomas. "This is a surprise, Thomas. I thought you'd be at work today." "Funny, I thought you'd have to notify me before allowing someone to destroy my property," he replied, sliding the photos across her immaculate desk. Victoria's composure cracked momentarily. "There must have been some miscommunication. Perhaps you overlooked an email." Thomas pulled out his phone, opened his email app, and handed it to her. Show me the email notification that I supposedly missed." The confrontation escalated as Victoria's explanations grew increasingly implausible. Thomas methodically dismantled each excuse with documentary evidence, his voice never rising despite the anger simmering beneath his calm demeanor. "This meeting is over," Victoria finally snapped, standing abruptly. "File a formal complaint if you must." As Thomas gathered his materials, Victoria stepped out, leaving her office door ajar. Through the crack, he could see her whispering urgently to another board member in the hallway. "He's digging too deep," Victoria hissed. "What if he finds out about the kickback deal? The whole board could be liable." That evening, as Thomas was reviewing county ordinances over a glass of whiskey, his doorbell rang. Rob Jenkins, the board's newest member and Victoria's usual yes man, stood on his porch, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I can't stay long," Rob said, declining Thomas's offer to come inside. "Victoria doesn't know I'm here." He passed Thomas a USB drive. "Everything's on here. Meeting minutes that were never published, emails, the contract with Velocity. She's getting a $50,000 personal consulting fee. The board gets free internet for life, and the HOA account gets a $100,000 donation that she has sole discretion over." "Why are you telling me this?" Thomas asked. Rob's face hardened. "Because my grandmother's rose bushes got destroyed too. And because what they're doing is illegal. I'm a lawyer, and I never signed off on this. They forged my signature on the documents." Thomas waited until Rob's headlights disappeared around the corner before locking his door and heading to his home office. He inserted the USB drive with the caution of someone handling radioactive material. The files were organized with surprising precision, folders labeled by date, emails saved as PDFs with highlighted sections, spreadsheets tracking payments. It was the work of someone who'd been documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to act. The most damning evidence was a recording, timestamped 3 weeks ago, of Victoria speaking with Eric Lawson from Velocity Fiber. "We need to fast-track this before the county inspector returns from medical leave." Victoria's voice came through clearly. "Morgan's property is key. It's the shortest road between grid sections. Saves us nearly $50,000 in installation costs." "And if he objects?" Eric asked. Victoria's laugh was cold. "He travels every month like clockwork. We'll do it while he's gone. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? Besides, What's he going to do? Dig up his own yard and cut the cable? Thomas paused the recording, an ice-cold clarity washing over him. This wasn't just about saving installation costs. The route through his property literally connected the entire network. Without that segment, half the neighborhood would be unreachable. He opened another file, a neighborhood map with properties color-coded. His was marked in red, along with 5 others. With growing suspicion, he cross-referenced the names with HOA complaint records from his personal archive. All 6 red-marked homeowners had filed formal complaints against Victoria in the past year. It's not just corruption, Thomas muttered. It's retribution. The final document on the drive was a letter from Rob to the County Ethics Board, drafted but never sent, detailing the entire scheme. At the bottom was a handwritten note. I never had the courage to send this. Maybe you will. Thomas checked his watch, 11:43 p.m. He picked up his phone and called Mrs. Patel, knowing the elderly judge often stayed up late reading legal journals. The cable cutters made a satisfying snap as they severed the line. He cut again 6 inches down, removing a section entirely. Thomas placed the fiber segment in an evidence bag, labeled it with the date and time, then carefully reburied the trench, tamping down the soil and arranging it to look undisturbed. Inside his home, he locked the evidence in his fire safe, poured himself a rare midday whiskey, and waited for the chaos to begin. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patel at 2:47 p.m. Internet down across neighborhood. Victoria outside screaming into phone. Quite entertaining from my window. Thomas smiled grimly and began his countdown. Based on his conversation with Mrs. Patel, Hoad shared insights from her years on the bench handling utility disputes. He estimated he had approximately 4 hours before velocity technicians traced the outage to his property. He used that time with surgical precision. First, he called the county permit office and spoke with the inspector who'd just returned from medical leave. Thomas didn't mention the cut cable, focusing instead on the unauthorized installation. The inspector, clearly irritated at having work done during his absence, promised to open an investigation. Next, Thomas printed 40 copies of a simple notice. Emergency HOA meeting, 7 p.m. tomorrow. Community Center, 2 PICS. UTILORISEDUTILITWRK and Financial REGULARTAs. He began walking the neighborhood, placing one in each mailbox. He'd reached the 23rd house when his phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Morgan. The voice was professionally pleasant. This is Sandra Wu from Velocity Fiber. We're experiencing an outage in your area, and our diagnostic equipment indicates the break might be on your property. Would it be possible for our technicians to access your yard? Thomas had rehearsed this moment. Of course, he said smoothly. I'll need to see your utility easement agreement first though. You know, the one giving you permission to run lines through my property. A pause. I'll have to check with our records department. Can I call you back? Certainly. I'll be home all day. Thomas ended the call and resumed his delivery route. By 5 p.m., he'd distributed all the notices and returned home to find 3 messages from Velocity, each increasingly urgent. His surveillance camera captured a Velocity van driving slowly past his house twice. At 5:32 p.m., his phone rang again. This time, it was Victoria. Thomas, she said, her voice honey-sweet. We seem to have a misunderstanding about some work being done in the neighborhood. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner? My treat, of course. I'm actually quite busy preparing for tomorrow's HOA meeting, he replied. Did you receive the notice? I made sure everyone got one. The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. Victoria hadn't expected a counter-offensive this organized, this fast. What meeting? She finally managed. I didn't authorize any meeting. Check the bylaws, Victoria. Section 12, paragraph 3. Any homeowner can call an emergency meeting with 24 hours notice for urgent community matters. Thomas kept his voice neutral, professional. I'd say unauthorized construction affecting half the neighborhood's utilities qualifies, wouldn't you? Thomas Morgan's return from his business trip started like a scene from a nightmare. As his taxi pulled up to his corner lot in Oak Ridge Estates, he dropped his coffee cup, liquid splashing onto his freshly pressed suit. A jagged wound of freshly turned earth sliced across his award-winning front lawn, the same lawn that had won Best Landscaping 3 years running in the community's annual contest. "What in God's name?" he whispered, already rushing toward the damage before the driver had even popped the trunk. The trench cut a serpentine path from the street directly through his prized Forever Sunshine rose bushes, rare hybrids he'd specially imported from Japan, before disappearing into his neighbor's yard. Several bushes lay crushed beneath careless piles of dirt, their yellow blooms now muddied and broken. Thomas dropped to his knees, ignoring the soil staining his $200 slacks, and peered into the shallow ditch. There, gleaming like a black snake, lay a fiber optic cable. No flags, no markings, no notice or permission requested. His phone was out before he'd even stood up again. "HOA office, this is Brenda speaking," chirped the voice on the other end. 10 minutes, and a heated conversation later, Thomas was no closer to answers. The HOA claimed complete ignorance. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patel, an 80-year-old retired judge with a photographic memory and a penchant for neighborhood surveillance, provided the only clue. "Oh yes, Thomas dear, very suspicious," she said, offering him tea through her screen door. Velocity fiber truck, no official uniforms, and they were rushing. Finished the whole block in under 2 hours. Most peculiar thing, that nice Victoria from the HOA was watching them the entire time, checking her watch. Mrs. Patel leaned closer, and I distinctly heard her say, "Perfect. The Morgan property is done, and he won't be back until tomorrow." Thomas's laptop glowed well past midnight as he dug through county records, permit applications, and neighborhood bylaws. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Not only was Velocity's work not scheduled to begin for another month, but the specific grouting through his property wasn't even in the approved plans. His hands trembled slightly as he enlarged the official utility placement map on his screen. The approved route clearly showed the fiber line following the street, not cutting through yards. Someone had deliberately altered the implementation without updating the permits. Thomas poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, a rare indulgence for a weeknight, and stepped onto his back patio. The neighborhood lay quiet under a waxing moon, porch lights casting islands of yellow glow amid the darkness. From somewhere nearby came the soft chirp of crickets, oblivious to the human drama unfolding around them. He took a slow sip, the alcohol warming his throat. This wasn't just about his yard anymore. The deliberately timed installation during his absence, Victoria's suspicious presence, the deviation from approved plans, it all pointed to something more calculated than bureaucratic incompetence. Thomas pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his photo gallery. For 15 years, he'd documented every HOA meeting, every notice, every community event, not out of paranoia, but from the professional habit of a man who'd built his career in corporate compliance. Nothing beats contemporaneous documentation, his mentor had always said. There it was, a photo from 3 months ago. Victoria at the quarterly HOA meeting, standing beside a man in a sharp suit. Thomas zoomed in on the man's name badge. Eric Lawson, Regional Director, Velocity Fiber. In the background, partially visible on the presentation screen, was a slide showing projected installation dates. December, not October. Another swipe revealed a second photo, this one showing Victoria and Eric in what appeared to be an intense private conversation in the parking lot after the meeting. Thomas hadn't thought anything of it at the time. He pulled up his calendar app and made an entry for tomorrow morning. HOA office, 9 a.m. Then he opened his email and composed a message to his boss. Need to take personal day tomorrow. Property damage requiring immediate attention. As he finally crawled into bed at 2 a.m., Thomas found himself oddly calm. Whatever game Victoria was playing, she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd chosen the wrong yard to vandalize and the wrong homeowner to deceive. 15 years of dealing with Victoria's petty tyranny had taught Thomas patience and strategy, virtues that would serve him well in the coming confrontation. Just before sleep claimed him, His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patel. "Check your email. Found something you should see." Attached was a grainy photo taken through a window, showing Victoria and the Velocity representative exchanging what appeared to be an envelope. "You personally handled what exactly?" Thomas asked quietly. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Victoria. Outside, the crowd of neighbors had grown to at least 20 people. The news camera was now pointed directly at Thomas's living room window. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted from anger to panic. "I need to make a call," she muttered, heading toward the hallway. "Before you do," Thomas said, "you should know that Rob Jenkins provided me with copies of all the documentation, including the recording of your meeting with Eric Lawson, where you specifically targeted my property." He tapped his laptop, and Victoria's voice filled the room. "Better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? Besides, what's he going to do? Dig up his own yard and cut the cable?" The Velocity supervisor's jaw literally dropped. "Ms. Hargrove, I think our legal department needs to be involved immediately." From outside came the sound of another vehicle arriving, a white county inspector's truck with official markings. The crowd parted to let the inspector through. "Is this what it takes to get your attention, Victoria?" Thomas asked, his voice now carrying a hint of righteous anger. "Did you think I'd just replant my roses and forget about it? Or was destroying my garden part of your plan all along? Punishment for the times I've questioned your authority." The quarterly HOA newsletter, now edited by a rotating committee of residents rather than Victoria's inner circle, featured a front-page story about the new Community Technology Center built with the renegotiated Velocity contract funds. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from Rob. "Board meeting tonight. Need your input on the new transparency bylaws." As Thomas headed inside to change for the meeting, he noticed Mrs. Patel watering her garden across the street. She gave him a knowing nod and a small salute with her watering can. Sometimes, Thomas reflected, the most important connections weren't fiber optic cables, but the ones between neighbors who stood together against corruption. And sometimes, progress required cutting a few wires before building something better. The neighborhood's internet was faster now, but more importantly, so was its response to injustice. But the story wasn't quite finished. 1 week after the emergency meeting, as Thomas was replanting his garden, a certified letter arrived. It was from the county prosecutor's office, requesting his testimony in a case against Victoria Hargrove for fraud, corruption, and misappropriation of funds. Thomas called Mrs. Patel immediately. "Did you get one too?" "Indeed I did," she replied. "As did half the neighborhood, I suspect." The prosecutor called me personally, said it was one of the most well-documented cases of HOA corruption they'd ever seen. When Thomas arrived for his interview at the prosecutor's office, he was surprised to find himself in a conference room with not just the county officials, but representatives from the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. "Your case has sparked something bigger, Mr. Morgan," explained the lead prosecutor. "We've received complaints from 6 other HOAs where Victoria Hargroves served as a consultant after leaving Oak Ridge. Same pattern: fiber internet installations, kickbacks, unauthorized access. She was running a circuit," Thomas realized. "More like a network," the prosecutor replied with a grim smile. "But thanks to your documentation, we've got enough to bring charges across multiple jurisdictions." That evening, Thomas found himself on the local news, identified as the HOA watchdog who had exposed a statewide pattern of corruption. His phone rang constantly with interview requests and messages from homeowners in other communities asking for advice. Rob and Mrs. Patel suggested establishing a small nonprofit focused on HOA governance education. "People need to know their rights," Mrs. Patel insisted, "and how to protect them." Thomas agreed. What had begun with a simple trench across his lawn had exposed something far deeper, a foundation of community empowerment that could support many neighborhoods beyond his own. As fall turned to winter, Victoria Hargrove accepted a plea deal that included restitution, community service, and a ban from serving on any HOA board. The story made national news, sparking conversations about HOA oversight and accountability across the country. Thomas's last act in the saga was to install a small garden plaque beside his restored rose bushes. It read simply, "Sometimes growing something beautiful requires removing what doesn't belong." The neighborhood erupted into digital darkness by Wednesday evening. Half the residents lost internet completely. The others experienced such severe problems that streaming services became unwatchable pixelated messes. The Oak Ridge Estates Facebook group, normally reserved for lost pet announcements and complaints about garbage collection, exploded with outrage. By Thursday morning, Thomas awakened to find his peaceful street transformed into a utility war zone. 3 velocity fiber vans had parked along the curb, and technicians in bright orange vests swarmed with complicated-looking detection equipment. A news van from the local station had somehow caught wind of the situation and was interviewing frustrated residents. Thomas calmly made a pot of coffee and watched from his kitchen window. At precisely 9:32 am, the detection equipment led the technicians to his front yard. 10 minutes later, Victoria Hargrove's Mercedes screeched to a halt behind the vans, and she emerged wearing a tennis outfit, her face contorted with fury. "That's his house," she shouted, pointing at Thomas's front door. "He's the one who's been causing problems." Thomas took a last sip of coffee, straightened his tie, and opened his front door before Victoria could pound on it. "Mr. Morgan," the velocity supervisor approached, "we've detected a break